Alright, so this is my second vlog of the day. Like the first vlog, it was kind of a response to a video, actually. And I was just encountering the work of Christopher Hitchens, and he was doing an interview with this woman, and the way that the interview went was she put, this pretty much sums it up, she put, she said, the sexist but charming Christopher Hitchens. And I thought, was what he really said sexist? Because he was basically, negating feminist ideology in a very calm Christopher Hitchens voice, and she was like, "But that's just wrong. You have a chance to take it back, but it's just wrong." And it's like, I don't like those arguments which just say, "But it's just wrong," because they're not very intellectual. Uh, in fact, they're very. It's very scary to think that people would use that argument. I mean, when I think about racism, you know, there's you can provide logical reasons for why being racist is bad. You don't just have to say it's just wrong. You could point out how it's silly to distinguish one person's skin color from another's. You could point out. You can usually figure out a way to logically substantiate any ethical claim. Now, what Hitchens was basically saying is that women should not be. I was going to say permitted. No, that they should not be forbidden. No, wait. What's the word I'm looking for? Women should not be compelled to work careers. They should be permitted to. And this is a very interesting thing because it's something I've thought about a good deal, and the feminist movement in general. I found that feminism for a long time made me very paranoid about speaking my mind. But I realized, after having revisited the work of like George Carlin and other comedians on this, and having looked at some of the empirics of the matter, I don't really like that word empirics. It's such a debate term. It's like, but I realized feminists do take themselves very seriously, like Carlin pointed out, and I have the same kind of skepticism that Carlin has about people who take themselves too seriously, because in general, I feel like humor reveals something to people and brings very important things to the forefront where they wouldn't have noticed them before. A mood reveals things to you. And though one can feel tremendous angst thinking about certain global problems, one has to remember that feeling is very different from the feeling that you get when you're actually faced with an immediate problem. And I think that if one can be brought to laugh about the abstract problem, which is a real problem to other people, and in a sense a real problem to you, but you're protected from that depending on what your current circumstances. I think that humor can do a lot of good or relieve a lot of stress, a lot of needless anxiety, misunderstandings that comes about of the whole politically correct movement, which I find frankly to be a kind of fascism. And I said it. I'm almost inclined to make a borderline sexist statement by saying, maybe it's good for girls to be feminists but not guys. And let me specify exactly what I mean by this, though. Feminism means different things according to who uses it. A girl who's a feminist probably is a good, self-assertive woman. A man who's a feminist, though, I've found sometimes people who usually use this term, amongst whom are like my heroes like Kurt Cobain, are a bit hypocritical. And the thing is, I firmly believe, actually, in a kind of pragmatism, I believe that people should base things in their immediate experience. According to what Christopher Hitchens was saying, he's talking about how women basically seem to be naturally more predisposed as caretakers and caregivers than men do. And this seems sexist. However, The question is, of course, is biology sexist? Because are we anthropomorphizing our scientific findings when we say, look at a group of apes, and it seems like pretty much universally ape behavior is that the women stay home with their young, and the men go out and hunt and create games and things of that nature. Well, that's a question up in the air. It's very interesting, though, how ideology has become severed from biology, and as Aldous Huxley pointed out, we have to focus on both. I personally can speak from immediate experience again. Any scientific finding that you find, like the Buddha said and like William James pointed out, you should measure it against your own immediate experience. And then if you find an experience that you have had that corroborates this theory, and this theory helps to explain a life situation, then great. If not, you probably shouldn't believe it just on general principle because you don't know what you're talking about. Now, I'm going to speak from my experience as a child. Like, as a child, you know, both my parents worked, and I was an only child, and we didn't have a pet for a while. This has changed now, at least the only child in the pet part. And I cultivated a solitude since I was very young, and maybe if you're going to run the argument that environment really is what builds character, I tend towards a kind of solitude and also a kind of emotional detachment from my parents, because a lot of times as a kid, I didn't have a mother at home until the evening. Now, that's okay, but the truth of the matter is that I spent a lot of time watching cartoons and all of that, and it was nice, but it was lonely too. And my mother didn't come from the United States. She came from the Soviet Union. And I've learned very little about how she took the job that she did, but as I understand, it wasn't her dream job. She went into it. She went into biochemistry as opposed to the humanities because it was what was considered practical in the society, and it advanced the what would you call it? It advanced the whole male-centered agenda of the society. Now, at times I do wish that my mother were there for me, were a more traditional mom. What I'm pointing out is that in many senses I feel that modern feminism, as a movement, as an ideology, as opposed to an attitude, which has different meanings for different people, tends to move away from this family structure in favor of our current society. Now, from Christopher Hitchens' point of view now, it seems as though the society is important to uphold, and the adult males are the ones who should be compelled to do this. Why? Well, remember, he didn't say that a woman couldn't go into the workforce if she were, like, say, a biological exception to this principle that we've observed since the apes, if we're going to accept the epistemology of our biological observations of apes to be adequate. You know, he's saying, look, even if there's an exception here, that's okay, but it shouldn't be a requirement. So you might say, well, why should it be a requirement for men to take on roles? Well, first of all, there are two things. First of all, it's this whole notion that children tend to feel more intimate with their mothers and their fathers. And secondly, there's this whole notion of biology, as opposed to ideology. Now think about it, the feminist movement, for all of its merits, I mean, I'm sure that things are a lot better now than they were in the 50s for women like Sylvia Plath, and they get an opportunity to actually have a career. But this ideology, has originated in pretty much the past 30 years. Biologically speaking, we've been the same as human beings for much longer than that. And mythologically speaking, there are some very clear universals. Even if we're drawing just on collective memory, I don't know. But there's always the myth in these hero tales that Joseph Campbell describes of a son atoning with his father. Because there's always a sense of separation between father and son. I can attest to this personally. There seems to be. And there seems to be a competitive nature about it too. I'm not going to say that Freud was totally correct, but he was onto something there. And almost universally, the way that this is overcome is through the son somehow asserting a kind of masculine authority. And this is what leads to the atonement of the father motif in mythology. Interestingly enough, people who were never brought up with this mythology have experienced something very similar in their dreams. It suggests it's not coming from consciousness, it's not coming from ideology. It's coming from the unconscious, the needs of the body, of the organism, which we largely share with apes. Now, again, like Christopher Hitchens, I'm not ruling out exceptions to this. But I can't vouch personally as a man for, how should I say it, for desiring to be so sedentary that I don't have ambitions. Even when I tend to stay at home, usually on the internet, intellectualizing, learning stuff, writing. And I mean, if I had kids, I'd probably be a pretty good father. But would I be a totally attentive parent? I mean, there's only so far that one can go. I'd say, well, what about people who are exceptions to the male rule? What about people who would be naturally good parents? Like I said, I can't attest to that. But I would imagine that at least someone who's been brought up with a male role model will tend to want to assert a kind of masculinity. And so, at least as far as Hitchens is concerned, I can understand where he was coming from. And it's daring and bold of him to say it. Maybe more bold than daring, because I'm sure he never really cared that much about upsetting people. You know what I mean? Because that's just the kind of guy that he is. And this may seem sexist, but biologically speaking, mythologically speaking, spiritually seeking, I've found, pragmatically, this to be a concern. But notice, like Hitchens, I don't really condone a kind of freedom. I think women should not be compelled to fill masculine roles. If we need someone to fill them, then maybe it's okay to compel men to. I've noticed amongst friends who were raised by single mothers that some of them do lack this kind of drive that I have. But they can also be very unhappy. And I think that although it's true, you could observe a child and not, at any age, and sometimes not be able to tell the gender of the child. And that could seem very abstract. Gender still plays a role in everyone's life from the very beginning, because we have a mother and a father. I mean, however you want to look at it. Or at least some male figure, I should hope. We have, from the very beginning, the mother and the father, and I think that they determine how we tend to feel about a given gender. So this is a very personal talk that I have. Criticizing feminism, supporting Hitchens, responding to Hitchens, criticizing political correctness, but not in a heated political way. And, you might say that I wasn't entirely fair in what I said, because equality is what we're aiming for, but you know what I found, and this has been particularly helpful to a friend of mine named Amber, who lives in San Francisco. I once pointed out to her, a real hang-up seems to be always to try to make things fair. You always try to have the chips stacked on evenly on both sides. But the matter seems to be not one of numerical chips, but rather that two things which may appear to be two can be one oftentimes, and things which may appear to be one can be further subdivided into many other arguments. So I hope that I've fairly paid consideration to this, and even if you disagree with me, that's okay, because I'm grounding this in my experience, not in yours. So thanks.